list, yes, taking on the U.S. This includes almonds, apples, and some chemicals. The Indian government says it's retaliation for U.S. tariffs on steel and aluminum. Now, all of this comes as China is lowering barriers. I said lowering barriers towards just about everyone else except the United States. Now, I want you to have a look at this chart from researchers at the Peterson Institute. It is incredibly interesting because as the trade war with the U.S. has picked up, the average Chinese tariff on American goods has more than doubled. You have to compare that, though, with the average tariff on goods coming from anywhere else that has actually come down. Joining me now is Chad Bowen. He is one of the researchers behind those numbers. He is a senior fellow at the Peterson Institute. I really appreciate you being with us, Chad. This study was fascinating, strategic on China's part.
Yeah, and to be honest, we were a little bit surprised by the numbers as well. You know, we'd heard the story last year that the headline was, you know, at instances China was cutting its tariff on certain products. Automobiles in the middle of the year was the big example. But it wasn't really until we looked at the data that we saw just how widespread and deliberate China's actions here really were.
And that's the key there. I don't mean to interrupt, but that's the key there. It was deliberate. They thought we're going to keep... Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it really is deliberate. You know, it's as if the Chinese have recognized that when they retaliate against the United States, this is going to be them imposing costs on themselves. And one way that they can seek to minimize those costs is by cutting their tariffs toward everybody else, creating opportunities for their consumers to go out and find other trading relationships with Canada or with Europe or Japan and make it a little bit easier now that they're going to be facing tariffs from stuff coming in from the United States.
Yeah, and you make very clear this is all within the WTO umbrella. I have to ask you, though, in terms of how much legs this new strategy may be. Let's say in a couple months we do get a trade deal between China and the U.S. I keep arguing that, look, the hangover could last years, maybe even decades, meaning the Chinese won't forget this. Do you see that perhaps even trickling down to, we were just talking about aviation, take them. You know, it's essentially a duopoly. You've got Boeing and Airbus. Could the Chinese, one of the fastest growing aviation markets in the world, say, yeah, we're never going to order a Boeing plane again?
Yeah, Boeing and Airbus, I think, are probably a little bit different. You know, they have so many Boeing in their fleet that they're going to need to service those and get parts for those and have an ongoing relationship with Boeing for years and probably decades to come. But for a lot of other products, that's really not the case. And once Chinese consumers get the taste of, you know, say, Canadian lobster or Japanese salmon and move away from the American products, they may never go back. So I agree with you. There may be some long-term hangover effects of all these tariffs, even if we were to get a deal sometime soon.
So interesting. Okay, we talked about the Chinese consumers. Let's go to those American consumers. This is a big point of contention at the White House. And yet, would you say that basically it's the American consumer that's going to suffer through this trade war?
So far, that's what the evidence has found. So we do have a couple of academic studies that have looked at this question. Obviously, President Trump denies it. He says that the foreigners are paying the costs of his tariffs, but that doesn't seem to be true in the data. And this next round of tariffs that he has on tap, he's got $300 billion of more imports from China lined up with 25% tariffs that are going to be coming on. That's really going to hit the consumer products, the shoes, the clothes, the toys, the iPhone products. So I think for the American consumer, the impact of the President Trump's trade war is actually only going to get worse.
Yeah, and that is not good news for American consumers, especially as the Trump administration says that, yeah, that's a good likelihood these new tariffs will be a reality. Chad, thanks so much. Really important research. We'll come back to